later.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, welcome to our virtual event for Fresh Brewed Murder. My name is Julie. I'm the events manager at Roundabout Books. I'm so excited to talk about this book and to this author tonight. A few quick things about the store. This Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day. So if you're local, please come by and say hi to us. If you're joining us from outside of the Bend area, please visit your local independent bookstore because they need to stay in business. And just to remind everyone, the store is open every day 10 to 5. If you're not comfortable coming in the store to pick up an item, you can call, pay for it over the phone. We'll put it out on the red bench. We're also still doing owl delivery once a week. So just want to remind everyone that Roundabout's still going strong. And we love seeing everybody even during this time of somewhat uncertainty. But this is going to be a really fun conversation. So I want to get to it. First, I'm going to introduce our author. So Kelly Garrett writes under the pen name Emmeline Duncan. So this is going to be the first in the Ground Rules mystery series. Kelly also writes YA novels. She is a 2020 Oregon Literary Fellow, a board member of the Northwest chapter of the Mystery Writers of America, and co-organizer of the Friends of Mysteries Bloody Thursday lecture series. She is joining us tonight from Portland, which is obviously where the book is set. So Kelly, Emmeline, let's get started.
Awesome.
So first of all, tell me about picking a pen name. I'm always intrigued by this.
Well, it was interesting when I when I thought of what I wanted to use as a pen name. I actually chose a name off of my family tree. Emmeline Duncan was my third great grandmother, and I thought it was a nice picking a name that kind of felt like it really did represent like me and like part of like my personal history versus just coming up with something that I made up. And going forward, I'm planning on doing young adult as Kelly and then stuff for adults as Emmeline.
Okay, and that's a pretty common thing I've been seeing with YA, where the author will use a slightly different name if they're writing more adult stuff. I think of like Victoria V.E. Schwab having done that.
Although for me, it's kind of funny because I think The Last to Die is edgier than
right.
Fresh Brewed Murder, but
right. And I do love that you called it a cozy mystery, which sometimes gets, a weird reaction from people, but I've always loved them. And what made you, I guess, decide to kind of embrace the cozy mystery series as opposed to maybe a lot more of the blood and violence mysteries that we're used to?
well, I've always loved amateur sleuth novels, and I've always loved, cozies. They're so much fun, and it's nice to sort of sit down and relax and have a book that's like a really strong puzzle that can make interesting, points, but isn't so focused on blood and gore. And it felt like Fresh Food Murder to me felt like setting like having a book set like a food cart pod had that sort of small town cozy atmosphere, even though it was in a city, because it created like a small community that the murder sort of like made everything feel out of order until it was solved. And I mean, I don't know, I just always just loved cozies. And so writing, and it felt like a really natural area to write in, because I liked having the sort of the parameters that I push a little bit in the book, but that it creates a really fun way to structure a novel around as well. And because the blood and guts aren't really the part of books that I really enjoy, even though I do read things that are quite a bit darker. And so that's not really what I want to write. So this just felt like a very natural book for me.
Awesome. So when I was reading it and all the descriptions of the food truck pods, which Bend is now embracing, and I know Portland has lost a few of the older spaces for food trucks, but I kept thinking of the one off of, gosh, I want to say it was Burnside and something, but it had the double-decker English school bus or English bus it was the grilled cheese grill. I don't know
Oh
if
yeah,
you ever went to that one.
I actually lived very close to where that used to be.
Yeah.
And I was sad because the grilled cheese grill, they moved out of that pod. That pod still exists. But one thing that's fun, there is actually a coffee pod called Tav. and it's on Southeast Hawthorne, and it's also in a double-decker bus, and it's an Egyptian style coffee house, and it's fun. The second floor has it's hard to explain how it's set up to basically to be like an Egyptian style coffee house. And so you can take your your Turkish coffee that comes with like a little snack upstairs to that. And they have like really creative, like they have a fantastic mint cold brew in the summer.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I'll have to check that out the next time I'm in town. Um, so so let's just kind of talk about, your main character in the book without giving anything away. So tell me how you came up with Sage Caplin.
Well, with Sage, I originally sort of when I first thought of the book, I thought of someone that owned like a coffee cart and that was sort of a fixer where she would, fix people's problems. So that'd be kind of fun if people like go to the coffee cart and they're like, I heard you can solve this for me. And then over time, it kind of evolved more into the traditional mystery, which I think turned out really well. But I had Sage is the daughter. Her mother is a really well-known grifter. If you've ever seen the TV show Leverage, I like to say that her mother is like an evil Sophie Devereaux.
Mm,
But her dad is a police officer, and so she has this like really strong sense of justice. And her mother kind of used her as a basically as a prop in some cons when she was a kid. And Sage developed a lot of kind of if she wanted to be, she'd be a great grifter, and she's really excellent at reading people. So she'll kind of like cold read people for fun, never for money. And she's a really excellent judge of character, and she's really good at telling when people are lying based off of her background. And so I have Sage being someone that really does care about justice. She kind of feels like she has some atonement she needs to do for her own personal history, even stuff wasn't her fault. And so when she does come across a problem, she does like to solve it, but she has generally pretty good boundaries of not jumping in maybe too hard. But
mm.
then she'll of course always end up wanting to help.
Yeah, I like how often she asked questions before making anything hasty. It seems like she's a very thoughtful person because she grew up kind of in an always ever changing lifestyle. So we talked a little bit about how you picked your pen name. How did you pick her name?
Um, well, sort of fun. I liked Sage because of what it symbolizes, right? The kind of both the sort of like when you say like sage advice being like good
Mhm,
advice, or like sage wisdom. And also it's people burn it to like cleanse.
mhm.
And so her presence, like, when you solve a mystery, that's a kind of like a almost also like a cleansing. And then Kaplan is uh, it's really funny. There's a really specific reason I chose it, and I'm trying to remember the exact definition of Kaplan because it was it was a role within the church,
Mm,
and so it kind of fit in also with the sort of like the justice and truth theme.
yeah. Well, cool. So, I wonder how much we can talk about without giving, too much of the story away. As I was reading it in the last couple of days, one of the things that came to mind is I was like, she's talking about all these coffees, and especially when she's pitching the coffee cocktails. And I was like, man, I I want to make some of these. Boom, get to the end of the book today, and there are some recipes. So did you make, like, are these your recipes? Like you did it all, or were they inspired by somebody else? Or
I mean, I did come up with all of them, although I can't really claim like that I truly invented them. So like one drink in the book is like a coffee soda, which there used to be multiple places around Portland that had coffee sodas, and I've tried them at multiple spots. And I just figured out like, okay, if I'm doing this for at home, how can I recreate this? And like the recipe uses simple syrup, which is not a unique concept. I'm like, how can I put a spin on it? And I know that I've made like ginger simple syrup often in the past. I'm like, oh, I bet I could make one with sage. So then there's that name tie-in, so I played around and made some sage simple syrup, and then I tried using that in a coffee soda and then put that in the book.
awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to try some. And I'm actually thinking of talking to Cassie and Sarah at the store and seeing if maybe we can do some specials or something with some of these. Um,
You should definitely try the coffee soda in the summer. It's really, really refreshing.
yeah, I'm trying to think of one of the places in Portland that had it, really close to where Portland Coffee Roasters is on when Sandy turns into like 8th or 7th. Anyway, it almost had like a kombucha taste, like a little bit of a sourness behind it, and I just loved it. So what do you want to tell us about this story?
Oh, that's a hard one. And it's funny because as a writer, I mean, I finished writing this book, like at least 2 years ago. And so in a way, part of my brain is still filled up with the second book, which I just turned in. And it's sometimes funny to think back of like, oh yeah, like what were the decisions I made in the first book? And why did I make those decisions? I'd say one thing I really like about this book is that I tried to stay true to like cozy mysteries, but also make it feel a little more modern. So my book does touch on like homelessness and gentrification, and it deals with some serious issues, but I always tried to make sure, I mean, but it deals with them with a bit of a light touch, and hopefully my goal is to have like a very hopeful touch with how it dealt with them. So there's like there's a runaway teen, like a homeless teenager in the book, but you see hope for her future. It's not just dire and grimness, but at the same time it hopefully feels authentic and true to what actually is happening in the world, without focusing too much on stuff that is hard and difficult.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, that's happening a lot in Portland. I mean, everywhere. Um, so Sage has a little bit of that in her background, correct? Like
Mhm.
she had to deal with a little bit of both uncertainty, but she actually does live on the streets at some point.
Yeah, but only for like a couple days.
That's right.
So it
Okay.
was enough to be really shocking for her, but it wasn't an extended amount of time. And
Yeah.
she actually, there's a minor character in the book that she actually met in that time, and him and his mom kind of took her under their wings and helped her like find the family that her mother had actually left her a clue on like how to find them. She just didn't put it together because she was 13.
Mhm.
Um, and to this day, like that's someone, because she's very loyal, and that's still like one of her very good friends.
And I like, for a first book, what you've done with introducing her family characters, which makes me think that they're going to come back and have a lot more interactions with her as the series goes on. So her brother Jackson is her half brother, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then her dad is in the picture because her mom is not, although she makes an appearance. And her uncle Jimmy, which is actually her great uncle. But I really liked that um, blended family. And also, you, at a certain point, you kind of choose your family where you bring friends in like that. How does she know Harley?
Um, it's just funny. I'm trying to remember if this made it into the book or not. They were baristas together in college.
Oh, that's right.
They
Okay.
both worked for the same like, well, I have it like supposed to be like a local kind of well-known coffee company, kind of like the kind of the best in town. And so they both learned, how to be like baristas, like working for like a, like a truly fantastic place. And Harley moved into coffee roasting,
Mm,
where Sage moved for a while into nonprofits, and Harley became a roaster, but she wanted to strike out on her own. And they have wasn't necessarily the best boss at the old place, even though he's incredibly good with coffee. And so they're able to get some fundings through Sage's family, and they're able to start the roastery. Yeah.
awesome. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think. It's such a fun little book. Sorry, I shouldn't say it that way, but I really enjoyed reading it. Um, and it's fresh in my mind, but I'm still trying to figure out like, so let's give a little bit of the plot.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Sage and Harley, they are ready to open their coffee cart. They have the roastery going, and they open their coffee cart, and the pod is used to be bigger. It was actually like kind of two lots next to each other, but the one is under redevelopment. It's being turned into an apartment building. And I didn't even think about it when I wrote it, but there are some people protesting that there are some like stuff being torn down. And then hey, Portland's been under, hundreds of days of protests. So that was kind of interesting timing. Um, and so Sage and Hurley get a spot in the lot, and it's a little controversial because there were a bunch of carts that just lost their home, although one cart like purposely left, and that's whose spot they take. And so they have their first couple days in business, and there's this guy who shows up a couple times. He keeps coming back, but he's really gruff and doesn't really seem particularly nice. And it turns out he's the developer for the lot across the street, And Sage finds this out when she comes to work one day and she finds him dead next to her cart. And the police look at Sage even more closely because he's not just the developer across the street, he's also one of her mother's former marks, and her mom stole money from him like a decade before. And so there's a stronger connection than Sage would like.
Yeah. And then it kind of goes from there. How did you, the detective that's involved in this, how did you kind of write him? I don't know how to describe him. He just has such a wall when he's talking to her that it was hard for me sometimes, because I was like, dude, you're not even letting her finish her sentence. Tell me about him.
Well, one thing that I want to be like, when I wrote this, I want to be careful about is I wanted to show a detective who's actually very competent at his job, right? And so even if like Sage wasn't, didn't end up solving the murder, like maybe he would have gotten there on his own. So I don't really like the trope of like incompetent detectives. I mean, it's okay to be, if they, that's why you want to have really strong clues. Like if there's a lot of red herrings that point to Sage, so that what he's doing is logical and makes sense. And I have read a lot of cozies, and there's sometimes a trope of the police officer being a love interest, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be like an antagonistic relationship that wasn't the villain. It's not going too far, but while staying antagonistic. And also I didn't, really want it to seem like, oh, they're gonna fall in love and have a happy ever after. I wanted it to feel like authentic and real.
Speaking of that, and we don't have to give away, who it is, but Sage does have some interactions with somebody at the food truck pod, and then also someone else that she knows. Kind of that I like that she's very confident in herself to kind of just be dating, just kind of like see what's out there. And so it sounds like maybe you were really intentional with that, so that it wasn't like a huge storyline to have a romance, but it's kind of natural that she's new to this pod and therefore might meet someone who strikes her fancy.
Yeah, and because Sage is a young character, and if you're single and in your mid-20s, like I mean, a lot of people date, so it felt natural for her to meet a couple people in her like her new life that she would like you go out on date, and you'll find out in the second book kind of like how things are going with that. um and it was a fun way too to kind of show different sides of her personality, based off of like what she does when she goes out on a date, and kind of shows parts of her world that we don't see purely at the coffee cart as well.
Yeah. So how did you kind of choose what Portland things you were going to include that kind of, center it in Portland, but also maybe aren't so obscure that a reader from somewhere else wouldn't know? Because obviously we have the Timbers included. There's a Timbers game.
There's actually some other subtle Timbers references that I think only maybe like really huge fans will get. A hint, if you look at some of the characters, like the fellow food cart pod, like the owner names, a lot of those have like subtle Timber connections. Like there's he's small, like there's a character like named Diego, and almost all of the names are actually Timbers names. First names only, should specify. I wanted to make sure that Portland felt like a character in the novel, and I wanted to show the Portland that I know and love, while still having that accessibility. I didn't want to get so far that someone would be like, I just don't understand. And so it was sometimes stopping, like, how do I describe a neighborhood in a few sentences that will set the scene and tell you what's going to be relevant, like for the story, without getting so long that like no one wants to read it, but being like an entertaining way to describe how something like a neighborhood is developed. One thing that I had a lot of fun with in the food cart pod is I did work some like regional specialties like into the food that's served. So for example, like there's a cart that serves pies, both savory and sweet, but it has a Marionberry pie. Like one of her specialties is Marionberry on a gluten-free hazelnut crust. And obviously Marionberries are very Oregon. And also Oregon grows like 95% of the nation's hazelnut crops. And so, that's that subtle, like, regional, but very, very Portland feeling. Another cart serves like chicken and JoJo's, and roast chicken and JoJo's are very much an Oregon thing. I've actually heard some arguments, over like who really invented the JoJo, because some people claim it was this like sales rep selling roasters that was actually in Vancouver, Washington, but it took off in Portland, and someone else tries to claim that it's Ohio. It was like someone in Ohio, even though JoJo's are only really found in Oregon.
Yeah. A friend of mine is on in the event with us right now, and she read the book. She's originally from California, but lives here in town. And we have gotten into this argument about the name itself. And are JoJo spears, or are they the rounds, or is it called a mojo? Or like we literally had this conversation. So when because it's Emma who has the PDX potato, right? Okay. Or PDX JoJo.
PDX JoJo's.
What is your definition of a JoJo? What shape is it?
Oh, they're always kind of cut into a wedge, and they should be breaded before they're roasted.
Okay. Okay. I feel like there is a little bit of a difference even from city to city, because when I was a kid, they're the rounds, like the potato cut that way. But
interesting. Yeah, for me it was always wedges, but I would say probably the key thing is the roasting aspect of it, and having the kind of the breaded, like having that crust to it, so it's not just a French fry and it's not just a wedge.
Awesome. So what made you pick coffee as opposed to like a brewery?
That's a good question, because the book I signed with my agent was actually a beer book. It was like a brewery. So I went to high school on the Oregon coast, and it was set in like a small town on the Oregon coast where so people come in and they start a brewery, and they're kind of on the forefront of gentrification. That's evidently a theme in my first couple books. They were kind of like they were the first example of the small town like starting to truly change and to grow. And so they start a brewery, and they find, after their soft lunch party, they find the dead body of the local newspaper editor. Like my character finds the dead body of the editor on the beach during her morning run, but that didn't sell. And so then I was thinking about, I have some other things that I played around with and wrote, but I really love coffee, and coffee is such a Portland thing. Like third wave coffee is a big deal here. There's so many micro roasters in Oregon in general, but so many here, that it felt like a really natural area to go into, especially when I realized I could combine it with a food cart, because that just created a unique, I thought, atmosphere, and it had, as I mentioned before, it has that kind of small community feel within a bigger city, and it's mobile. I mean, if I need to make changes in the future, she can have a second cart, or they can move, and it kind of can help me keep the book fresh. Versus, I mean, because if someone died every month at a food cart pod, I mean, people would quit going. But I could, figure out ways to keep it feeling fresh and varied.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's see, I'm trying to think, I think we should go ahead and open it up to some questions or comments from the people who have joined us. So if you have a microphone available, I can unmute you. If you don't, feel free to type your question in the chat. Just let's see what you guys had to say about this book. And I am going to pick on Kathleen because she's my friend and she's here in this event. So I'm hoping she has a question. And while we're waiting to see that, so you said you just turned in the second book. So when is it due to publish? Like, do you have a rough idea?
Oh, yeah, it'll come out in April 2022. And then the third book will come out in April 2023.
Does it feel weird to be saying those dates, like 2022?
Oh, it is. I have to actually stop and think, like, okay, what year is it now? And like, what year is it going to come out? But yeah, no, it's such a, it's really strange. And it's funny to think, like, so it's both a long time, it feels like a long time in the future, but it's actually a relatively short time, especially in publishing.
It is. I've talked to a couple authors recently. I'm a book editor outside of my work at the bookstore, and sometimes people will ask me, they're like, well, can't a book just come out in like 6 months? I'm like, it could, it won't. I mean, there is a long process when it comes to publishing houses. So let me ask you this. This is something I like to ask, and I probably should have warned you, but Besides this book, can you tell us some of your favorite cozy mysteries?
Um, okay, let me start out with one author. It's actually not cozy, but one of my all-time favorites, mystery writers, is Jane Casey. She's English. Hers would fall under police procedural, but um, it's a female detective working for the Met in London. Um, but they're just really great books. But they don't get like, I mean, I have one or two maybe get a little bit, I mean, a little bit like disturbing, but they don't necessarily dwell in necessarily all of the kind of grimy, like, DNA type of like evidence and stuff like that. But she's just a great writer. And then one thing I love is how her character relationships evolve over the course of the series. For Cozies, Angela Sanders wrote like Bait and Witch. It just came out earlier this year. She's a Portland writer. She's fantastic. Leslie Budowitz is great. Kate Lansing wrote Killer Chardonnay. The second book in her series, A Pairing to Die For, just came out. I would say if you like Fresh Brewed Murder, you'd probably really like Killer Chardonnay because it's about a winery in Boulder, and it has this sort of a similar younger character following her passion. Yeah, and it's funny, I read so many. Carola Dunn, she's actually out of Eugene. I love her Daisy Dalrymple series. They're set after like World War One. It's kind of like a flapper detective. There's at least in the teens, they're phenomenal. Like they're so much fun to read. I like Bailey Cates. She has this Miss Magical Book Bakery series set in Savannah, Georgia, and those are really fun.
Awesome. Did you ever read Lillian Jackson Braun and the Cat Who series?
I had just started reading one, and then I checked it out on my e-reader from the library, and then I got sidetracked writing, and so I need to recheck it out. But that's actually on my list. That's gonna be pretty soon.
My grandmother loved them because the cats are Siamese, and we had Siamese when I was a kid with her. And she was a prolific writer. I remember so many of those books at Barnes and Noble. Do you want to tell our listeners anything about your YA books?
Oh, sure. I have one young adult book out. The Last to Die. It is a teenage burglary ring gone wrong. It's told from the perspective of a teenage female anti-hero, which isn't everyone's cup of tea with a sort of the unlikable female narrator. But it's a very fast-paced book. It's kind of hard. Also, it's funny, once I say teenage burglary ring, it's hard to sort of get too far into it without starting to spoil everything. But it is a group of teens, relatively affluent, who they set up a burglary ring with like rules that they're going to follow, but then when someone breaks those rules, that's when things start to fall apart.
Interesting. So in between these cozy mysteries, are you writing more YA?
Yeah, I have a young adult manuscript that I am finishing editing that I'm going to send to my agent that will hopefully send out on submission soon. And then I also love graphic novels, so I'd love to do something with that. And I have some manuscripts in progress, but we'll see what happens.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions, which probably means that you and I have talked through all the questions they might have had. So I'll ask you this, and you said you love coffee. So wait, maybe you already said this. What is your favorite of the recipes in the back?
Well, I do really I make a lot of cold brew over the summer, and I have a very good DIY way to make cold brew listed in the back.
Okay.
The kopi yahi is kind of like, I do that once in a while when I feel like something a little special. That's coffee with like ginger and lemongrass. It's a Indonesian way to make coffee. The coffee sodas are also something I'll make once in a while. It's funny, I tend to drink like pour overs. I don't usually do sweet coffee, but once in a while, like in the summer especially, I'll do the coffee soda just because it has like carbonated water and like, it's a little bit sweet and it's like the coffee flavor.
Yeah. And I also like that you did include some non-milk options, especially like the Oatley barista. So, being specific for those of us who would normally be like, what can I substitute in here that's, because I'm not a chef.
I unfortunately, dairy and I don't get along, and I love Oatley barista, and it is so great for coffee. It's by far the kind of the creamiest, best non-dairy option. And it's funny, like if you told me a couple years ago that I would have really intense just opinions of oat milk, I would not have believed you. And now like I can talk about it for a shockingly long time and rank a bunch of brands.
It's rising in popularity. I'm seeing it at a lot of the chain coffee places too, as a milk alternative.
What's really great about Oatley, it's a Swedish company and they have really good market share, like and very good distribution in Europe. But their goal when they came to the US, so when they rolled out in the US, they initially rolled out the barista in kind of higher end coffee shops, but their goal is to be everywhere. And so Target was one of the first places they went into on the retail level. And their goal is to be like milk and like Oatly just like next to each other. They don't want to be like an exclusive brand, but they did this phenomenal job building buzz because it's by far one of the best non-dairy, if you're gonna like actually steam it, like a latte, it's by far one of the best non-dairy milks. So they did a brilliant job at getting into like hipster coffee shops in like Brooklyn and Portland and creating a market that they slowly started opening up more and more.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, Portland is the market to do that in. So, well, I think everyone should go pick up a copy of this. We have them at the store. And hopefully we'll be able to see you in person for an event sometime soon at the bookstore. Either for your YA books or for this, because, we could do another one in October for some fun mystery things. But I want to thank you again so much for taking the time to talk with me tonight about this book. I really enjoyed it, and you've been lovely to speak with tonight.
Well, thank you for having me. And some listeners might not know, I was actually supposed to do my first event at Roundabout Books a little over a year ago, and then the pandemic happened. So I was really touched when your bookstore reached out and asked if I would like to do an event for this book. So.
Well, Kensington sent it to me at the bookstore. It's Kensington, isn't it? Yeah.
It is Kensington.
Yeah, Larissa, and I believe it was actually addressed to me. And I was like, oh, they sent me a book? So I started thumbing through it, and then I was like, Larissa, we need to do an event.
Yeah, Larissa's fantastic. She's been wonderful to work with. Everyone at Kensington has been great, but
yeah.
Larissa's an amazing publicist.
And I'm just so appreciative. I know a lot of people are zoomed out, and that's in our vocabulary now. But Zoom and authors who are not local and willing to take the time to join us this way have kept Roundabout, and me especially, really happy to continue doing events. My friends will tell you I tend to kind of freak out when I meet authors because I just think it's so cool. So I just want to thank everybody who joined us tonight, who will hopefully watch this later on our YouTube channel, and just continue to support authors, independent bookstores, and books in general.
And happy Independent Bookstore Day. Remember, everyone, go out and visit your local store this weekend.
Yes, it's going to be an awesome day. I'm really excited that it's back and that we will have some things happening in person. So, Kelly, I want to wish you a wonderful evening, a great weekend. Keep us posted on any other books, and we will definitely have you back.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Remember, you can find us online at roundaboutbookshop.com or give the store a call at 541-306-6564. And I think that's about it. So thank you again. All right, let me get my mouse to work. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording so that it will start saving.